No, I'm not ready. Now I'm ready. Wait a minute. Is it time, Aaron?
It's going.
We're already going.
Yep.
Welcome to the Nutmeg Tavern. We are live, and we have a special guest today, and a special topic, and a special super long episode. We've got so much to talk about. I welcome Maggie or Carol, depending on who we want. Well,
Both
she's obviously not
it
Maggie
doesn't matter.
today.
It doesn't matter.
So here's Carol, and she doesn't have her Maggie outfit on.
No, I had to dress up a little. I wasn't going to let him look like this and me be in dirt and rags.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
I brought an outfit that was a little bit closer to the time that we're going to be talking about. Not quite. I'm about 25 years off, but it was the best I could do.
So Carol has been working on this topic for years and years, and she is a fountain of knowledge. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about Dickens, talking about the Christmas Carol, A Christmas Carol today. I am also joined by Ryan behind the bar.
Hello, it's good to be here today. Thanks for being with us.
You look special peppy back there, and look at that microphone.
I got
Woo!
some pep in my step and a big old microphone.
He's got a line into the time vortex is just amazing. Also, behind the scenes, there's Aaron.
Hey, everyone.
And there he is. He's on the console making all those good things happen back there.
Yep.
I don't even know where to start. There's so much.
Well, let's start with, can the chat hear me okay with my brand new microphone?
Can the chat hear?
I'm just joking.
Can you get? No? Okay.
So, actually, let's start real quick with who Carol is. Right here, Carol. Who's Carol?
Carol Jarboe, who are you?
Who am I? I am a living historian. I've been blessed enough to be on here before. I study the poor and the lower classes of here in the United States and also England, since that's where they came from. I do an indentured servant named Maggie. You may have seen John's DVD that they have put out on me. I also do lower class impressions, as well as one upper class impression that I don't get to do very often. And then I am also a teacher, and I have been teaching now for 21 years, and this happens to be one of the things that I teach.
It's going to be fun. So, some people were like, John, why are you doing Charles Dickens? Why are you doing A Christmas Carol? And one of the reasons why we did this is because, number one, it is so common in our culture today. So A Christmas Carol is one of those things that just about everybody in the United States knows about, has seen it maybe 10, 20, 30 times, who knows. It is not 18th century, but it does give us this window into the 19th century and early 19th century at that, which is a direct outworking of what's going on in the 18th century. So it helps us illuminate the world that the 18th century turned into. And there are specific things that are happening in the 18th century that make the world that Charles Dickens was writing about happen. And it's important for us to understand what was going on. It's like we can study the 18th century all day long, but if we don't understand what went on there and then what it turned into, well, then this isn't really helpful to us. We have to know where the 18th century came from, what happened in the 18th century, and then what did they do wrong and what did they do right that made the 19th century what it was. And so
in this case, the ramifications of what came out of the 18th century is right here in this book.
Right, and the bad ramifications. Really, this is like one of those, the story of, the moral of the story is, right? This is a very moralistic story, and he's talking about things that are happening in English society, and, to some extent, what's happening happening everywhere. But he's trying to change something on purpose. It isn't just hey, this is a fun story.
No.
We might look at it that way today, but he was very, very specific about that. Let's start with Charles Dickens.
Okay.
Tell me about Charles Dickens.
Well, we know already, most of us that have ever looked into Charles Dickens, that he was born in 1812. He was born the oldest son in the family. His father, John, was a naval pay clerk. So he worked at the naval yards handing out the pay for that. And he had some younger siblings that we won't go into. But his father, even though he handled money for the naval offices, was not really good at handling money of his own. And so the family was constantly in debt. And because of 1812, when Charles was born, it wasn't long before the war was over. And when you don't have that many people in the Navy anymore, you don't need a Navy anymore, your jobs kind of plunge. And so John Dickens got moved a couple of times through Charles's younger years. And he began to struggle a lot more with his debt and with his money. And so ended up with a situation when Charles was 12 where John Dickens was actually put in debtor's prison. And of course, debtor prison at this period of time, if you didn't have a way to survive, if you were the wife and children left behind, you got to go to debtor's prison too. So the whole family went into debtor's prison except for one older sister who remained in school, and Charles, who at 12 years old was considered old enough to work. And he was sent into a blacking factory. His job was to put glue on the back of the labels and stick them on the jars that the blacking was being sold of. And for that, he got 6 pence a week.
A week?
A week, which is just almost nothing at all. But yet that was what he did in order to be able to help with the family. He wasn't in there a really long period of time. His father was able to settle his debts and get back out. But his mother wanted him to stay. She wanted him, in fact, she negotiated with the owner of the factory to try to get Charles back into working in the blacking factory and to have to stay there. And he never forgave his mom for that. I mean, there's nothing like not being wanted, right? And
well, in a blacking factory.
in a blacking factory, a horrible, horrible
right.
situation.
They're working with lamp black, and it's the finest black powder in the world. It gets on everything.
That's
and
right.
the minute you try to wash your hands,
It just
they're all
spreads.
yeah.
And
it's
they were
terrible.
living there too.
Right.
This is a residential factory, so
breathing
you're
it
there
in,
all day long,
Yeah.
and sleeping upstairs somewhere on a bed of straw if you were lucky enough to have that. It was broken into groups where you had an older boy that took care of the younger boys. And there was some abuse that
Oh,
went
of
on that we
course.
know of
Yeah.
through that period of time. Charles never talked about it a whole lot. He only mentioned it to a friend of his a couple of times, but it was something that he kept inside of him quite a bit. But
And very common throughout that.
oh yes, very common through that period of time. But it's interesting that he ended up putting somebody like that in every single book that he wrote. If you look, every book that Charles Dickens is an author of always has a small child, usually a boy, that is abandoned by everyone else, who is in a horrible, nasty position, struggling to get out in some way, unloved, unwanted, unneeded. So this is a reflection of himself, and we'll see him in A Christmas Carol if you haven't found him already. He is able to come out. His father puts him back in school, and he finishes out his life and begins to write as he gets a little bit older, writing periodicals for magazines, little short pieces. He actually one time was asked to write captions for a magazine that was going to be put out that was going to be just drawings. And they needed someone to put little short, cute captions underneath it. And he said, why don't, instead of we doing that, why don't I write a story to go along with the pictures, and you put the pictures into the story, and we'll just do one a month. We'll do like a chapter a month, and people, it will increase the periodicals, and people will buy it more. And they said, are you sure that that's what will happen? And he goes, if it doesn't, then I'll quit and do what you want. So that's how he got into doing that, started writing under the name Boz, B-O-Z, was the way that he wrote. But he started that periodical writing like that, doing a chapter at a time. It made it cheap enough that everybody could buy it instead of writing a whole novel and trying to sell it. And actually set the stage for several of the books that he wrote for that.
And almost, are they like picture books with mostly picture and half text, or do you have a feel for that?
They're more text with a
Right.
picture or two to go with it, I think.
So
is how
sort
it
of
went.
even like
Yeah,
how
yeah,
the
something
Christmas
along
carol
that
came
line. He was the first person to come up, the people that he talked to about whether or not to do this periodical, doing one chapter, they were like, well, what's going to make people want to buy the next month? What you're going to write this little piece of the book and put a couple of pictures in there. What makes them want to write the next month? And he comes up with a word. He says, oh, I tell you what, we'll always have the protagonist, the main character, hanging onto their fingernails off the edge of a cliff at the end of this first, whatever we're writing, we'll leave them dangling so that it'll make them want to buy the next one. And he's the one that actually came up with the cliffhanger and the word cliffhanger, and that's where we get that is from him. His idea to keep things going.
Why did you do it to us?
So we can all be mad at him when we get to those points. He was the first one, though, to use a child as a protagonist. Nobody in the novel writing had ever used a child as the main star. But Charles Dickens had a heart for children, a real strong heart for children. And in particular, because of his background, poor children. Mm-hmm. And that's what really motivated him. And you see that again circling in all of his books. You have these poor children that are set in these instances that they cannot get out of.
So he's like reworking his childhood through all these stories.
He is.
How do I go back and save myself in these stories?
Yeah. What could I? Or here, look at me. This is what happened to me. And you should feel sorry for me. And he was really good at that. He was really good at tearing our heartstrings out. I mean, like with Oliver Twist, if you've had a chance to see or read that, that's a heart tugger. And the children that are not only Oliver Twist, but the children that are with Fagin, that are in the pickpocketing gang and stuff like that, and you see what little derelicts they are and where they've come from. It's very moving, and he continued to build on that. And
I think, and one of the things we're talking about here is the fact that he's not writing. He's not like making up big stories things that weren't happening. This is everyday stuff.
Right. He was a social activist. And he was particularly incensed about the Industrial Revolution. He did not like the ramifications that had come from the Industrial Revolution, and he didn't like the people that were being hurt by it. Not that he had anything against the positive part of it, but he didn't care for what it was doing to the poor. And he was very much an activist in that area. And the thing that angered him the most was that the upper classes, which were the rich or the wealthy class, and even the middling class was very close up there at this period of time, that there was such a gap down to the poor, and they really didn't care. They really didn't care. And so he tried to use his writings to show it to them over and over again. This is what's happening, and you need to look at this. Just in case you don't know. So he began to use his writings in such a way to try to show the public that would read them what it was that they were ignoring down at the bottom.
That makes me think of that line where he says, where the nephew says, "Fellow travelers to the grave." It's like, oh, you're living your life and you're not paying attention to these poor people, as if they're not even people.
Right, and really in Victorian society they weren't. The poor were considered not even people. They were considered drunkards, they were lazy, they were no good, they were criminals. All the lower class were despised, and if you were poor, it was a sin. It was something you did to yourself. If you couldn't pull yourself out of that, then there was a reason why you were doing that. And that was one of the big things that Charles really struggled with, was to try to show this. And in particular, like I said, the children really bothered him. And he wrote many times to his friends, he talked about the poor man's child, that society has ignored and has walked away from helping the poor man's child, and they need to see how they have to live. It wasn't uncommon for him to go out at night and walk 10, 15 miles in the night down to these areas that were so bad. And he came back so troubled about what he saw, and he would pour that into his writing to try to show it to his readers what they were missing or ignoring, if you want to call it that.
Because they didn't want to go to
they didn't want to go down to those places, and they really didn't care.
Right.
The attitude toward the poor at this period of time was, who cares? Not my problem. Not my problem. And he kept trying to point out that if someone would just care, if somebody would help, if they would just reach down to these people, that a lot of them could be pulled up. But it just didn't go anywhere really fast, and they weren't really paying a lot of attention. So he begins to use his books in a way to try to lay this out in front of them. The first one that he did that with was probably Oliver Twist. And Oliver Twist was his reaction against the 1834 Poor Law. And he wanted to show what the Poor Law had done and what it was doing to these people. He had reaction to it, but there were people that were probably moved by it. But for the most part, it didn't really change the society any at all. As time went on, there sprung up these wonderful very tongue-in-cheek, these wonderful schools that were boarding schools for young boys. And their advertisements read, "Give us your son when he's 2 and we will hand him back to you at 21, a man." We see this school also in Dickens' A Christmas Carol. You see echoes of that school as he showed it. But he went and toured some of those schools, and what he saw horrified him so badly. The way that the children were treated and how badly they were handled and what kind of horrible derelict places that these schools were in. So he came back and he writes a book called Nicholas Nickleby, that again about a young boy, where he lays it out exactly what it is. And the public this time were raised up. And there was a big outcry against these schools, and there was investigations into the schools, and it actually shut some of them down. And he came back and told his friend, he said, "Now I know the power I can wield. I can show society their ills and change them." And so this set the stage for the Christmas Carol that was to come.
Yeah, it's amazing how, and it's amazing how fiction can change societal ideas. We think, only hard and fast facts change people's ideas, but in fact, fiction and fictional works, movies, all those things that really aren't, they're just a story, can still be change society extremely. So tell us about the Little Nell piece. Because this idea of fiction versus nonfiction, or these made-up stories versus something that did actually happen. That's a thing that's happening like early in the 18th century. Defoe writes things, and he does both. He does writing. He does like nonfiction writing and fiction writing, and people don't really have a real clue about what's what.
Right, between the two of them. One of the periodicals that Dickens wrote was one that was called The Old Curiosity Shop, and it actually is a book now. They've put it all together. But it started out as a periodical. He was doing pieces of it, chapters of it. And it has to do with an old grandfather who's a gambler and not doing very well with his money and gets into trouble quite a bit, and his little granddaughter called Little Nell. And so he began to write this story about this old curiosity shop. They're kind of a pawn shop, junk shop kind of thing, where Little Nell spends her days working every day while grandfather goes out and gambles and runs around. She doesn't know where he is sometimes for weeks at a time. And then he'll show up again. Well, he finally gets into enough trouble where he says, "Pack up, we're going to go." And so it starts at that point where every month he wrote about them in a different place. And they would go from place to place, and they would have an adventure wherever this city was or ever this place that they were visiting. But toward the end of the year, there was something that happened in the last installment that just set the whole nation on its ear. Little Nell coughed. Yes, she coughed right at the end of that installment. Well, in Victorian times, to cough was a death knell. Tuberculosis, consumption. There's so many things that you could die of, starting with just this single cough. And people began to write him letters. "She can't be sick. Little Nell's not sick." There were people that wrote and actually said that they had gathered prayer groups at their church and they were praying for Little Nell, that she would not die because they were so worried about this character. Well, he continued writing for another several months, and it came over here to the United States. Those magazines were coming over here. And on the day that the last installment of the last magazine rolled into New York Harbor, there was a crowd on the docks. And they were shouting at the sailors, "Does Little Nell die? Does Little Nell die?" And the sailors shouted back, "Yes." And the whole docks went to pieces. And Dickens goes, if I can get people to love a character like that, what could I do to change the world?
Yeah, it makes me, I think something similar happened when Conan Doyle kills off
Sherlock Holmes.
Sherlock Holmes,
Yes.
and it's like, no, he didn't die.
I'm just
I'm
joking. He
joking,
really
I'm
didn't
joking.
have it.
He didn't really
He really
die.
didn't have it.
Because people were mad.
That's
They were
right. They
mad.
were upset. Well, people were upset with Little Nell. And Dickens was quite surprised, at that response that he got back. But again, it put a light bulb in his head that, what could I do? What could I do with a character? Could I change the world? Could I show them what it is that I feel strongly about by creating a character that would make people move their hearts? And again, we're laying the groundwork for A Christmas Carol, which is going to come after
And
that.
doing this within a piece of art, really.
Right.
I mean, it's like,
Right.
this isn't just, I'm going to write a story or I'm going to write an article and try to change people's minds. It's
Well,
like,
and
no.
he did. He tried
Right.
that. He started writing pamphlets. He started writing
Right.
Things, and
everybody's like,
people's just like, who cares?
Boring.
Boring. Yeah. Here's another pamphlet about why child labor that Dickens was
Right.
really upset about, and it did just kind of fall. And he thought, then I'll write a story. I'll write a story, and I'll move their hearts one way or another. I'm going to show them through a story what they refuse to listen to when I just tell them about it. So.
Okay, so before you guys dive into Christmas Carol, I want to go through a little bit of the super chat and some of the comments. But if they're not pertaining to what we're talking about today, I might not read them out loud just because we've got a lot of ground that we want to cover. So real quick, Rowan Crane says Merry Christmas, a bright Yule to everyone at Townsends. Julie Esper, thank you for doing all the readings.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas to the Townsends crew, and welcome back, Carol. In the chat, somebody said, well, look at our favorite laundry lady now. Which I thought was
I
very
didn't make
funny.
it getting laundry, I'll tell you that.
Mike Cal, Merry Christmas, Carol, and Townsends. Thanks so much for these recent readings. Definitely hoping for more, maybe longer readings from period journals. A couple of new Townsends members. Thank you so much for that. Cynthia Castle, Merry Christmas to you. Inez Santos, Merry Christmas. John Carroll, Aaron, and Ryan. Thank you so much for making my last few months much better. I love all your videos, especially the readings. Master Cool, thanks for the great live stream today. Denise Maloney Piran, loved the readings so much. Thanks. Joy Wandry, I think. Thanks so much for all you do and for Carol coming to share her expertise with us. And Matthew H. tossing a coin in for our Witcher, which is Aaron, taking care of that chat for you guys.
That's me.
And then there were a couple of things. Oh, somebody was asking if the Christmas Carol was set during the Little Ice Age. And you guys can write that down and maybe touch on that later. And then, I thought this one was interesting, and you might want to hear this. So, Carol, I met you once at Locust Grove last year, and you were the highlight of my visit. All right, that takes care of the housekeeping. You guys go ahead and send in your chats, send in your super chats, and we'll get to them when we can. We got a lot of time and a lot of things to cover, so thank you so much.
What do you think, Carol?
Well, we've talked a little bit about his background. Maybe we ought to talk about why he wrote the book.
Yeah.
What's the point of writing the book? A lot of people think that Dickens wrote the book because he was broke. He was. He had been riding high on a wave of popularity. In fact, he'd even come over here to America to talk to people. One of the things he came over here to talk about was the copyright laws, which were almost non-existent. And he was having a lot of trouble with people copying his books and calling it something else and changing the name and getting,
Sure.
So he came over here about that too. But he was applauded everywhere he went. I mean, he came through and did a 4-month tour. People just went crazy. It costs a lot of money to take a tour like that. He went home and he wrote 2 more books right after that. One of them was called American Notes, which was about his trip, where he was a little less than complimentary on what he saw over here.
We're rough characters.
Yeah, there were a few things he didn't care for, and he, being the social activist that he is, he made that very clear.
Yep.
And then he wrote a second book, Martin Chuzzlewit, which again kind of reflected, he made some kind of snide remarks in it about his American cousins. And let's just say that they were burning them in the streets. They were not happy, and so his reading population, his number of books just plummeted. And people quit reading and quit buying his stuff. His publishers got a little upset with him about that because they were out all the money for publishing these books that didn't go anywhere. And so he just bought a new house. He was redecorating it with his fine taste and style, and he was broke. So he needed to write another book very, very badly, but he was just at a blank. He just couldn't come up with anything really that he could write about. And then he went to visit what they call a ragged school. Have you ever heard of ragged schools? Do you know about ragged schools?
Not by that name, but yeah.
Well, one of the big problems that the Industrial Revolution had dumped on England was child labor. Child labor at this period of time was really, really bad. They started children sometimes as young as 3 years old working in factories. In the mines, they started them at 5, and they worked 16-hour days just like the adults. Why children? Why would you have children? Well, remember, this is all new. These machines are all new. They really didn't take someone with skill to be able to run them. And you didn't have to pay a child as much as you did an adult. So you just hired all these children and paid them 6 pence a week.
They can fit in places big people
and they can
can't.
fit in places that big people can't. And they don't tend to argue back with you when you tell them what to do. So we had a big problem with child labor. A lot of the families, we have had an influx of people moving into the London, Manchester, Liverpool area from everywhere in the rural areas, because once the Industrial Revolution started, it just shut down all the cottage industries, and people couldn't make a living.
Okay.
So they moved into the cities trying to find enough work to be able to survive, and so now you've got overpopulation problems. You've got people living in horrible rat-infested holes in the ground, which again we see in A Christmas Carol. He's going to point that out to us. And the Irish had just started their potato famine, so you've got gobs of Irish, the ones that were able to get out quickly, came down. So you've got this huge number of people that are just laying down and starving on the streets. Well, if you've moved in and you can barely you can't even eke out a living, your dad going to work and mom staying home with the kids, pretty soon mom's having to work and she's taking in laundry or she's doing something else, and you're still not making enough wage to feed your family. The last thing is you've got to send the children out to work. And so the children of these poor families were having to go to work every day, just like their parents were, and working these long, long hours. Well, there were charitable organizations who were trying to turn this around. They were hoping that they could give these children an education, a little bit of an education, teach them something, and give them a better chance of making a better wage to get out of this situation so that they don't just keep repeating where they are with their parents. And so these charitable people would go in and take over an abandoned, maybe a store or a building, and they would hold what they called ragged schools, because the children that came were in rags. They didn't have good clothing at all. They were just wearing rags, usually no shoes. And they would try to educate them during the day in different areas, teach them to at least read and write. They tried to feed them one meal a day while they were there to at least put something in their stomachs, because they were not getting fed at home or very little. And they were trying to put clothes on them if they could get people to donate clothes. But like we were talking about a little while ago, the upper classes thought that really wasn't their problem. And they thought that these people running these ragged schools were really silly. You know, if they want to go down in those areas and work with those criminal children, then, you know, nothing but pickpockets and thieves, go ahead, but we're really not going to help you out with that. So these poor ragged schools were struggling in these horrible, nasty areas, rat-infested. Oh, it was just terrible. Well, Dickens was invited to tour one or two of those, and so he did go down and see them. And when he came back, he wrote his friend, and he said he had never seen such pitiful and derelict children in his life, suffering as that no animal should ever suffer that way. And so when he came back, he thought, I am going to do something to stop this situation. And he told his friend, he said, I am going to strike a hammer blow against this whole child labor and this whole poor kids, you know, that no one's helping them, no one's doing anything for them. I'm going to change this. And he sat down and began to write A Christmas Carol. He had 6 weeks to do it, and he rolled it out. In order to get it done and get it printed and get it into the bookstores by Christmas, he had to do it very quickly. His publishers thought he was crazy. Nobody could do that. But his sledgehammer blow is what we know today as A Christmas Carol. And all came because of that. All became because of that. So why Christmas? Everybody wants to know why Christmas. Why did it just happen to be at Christmas time? Did he just happen to come into it at Christmas time? One of the things that Charles Dickens felt very strongly about was Christmas, because that was a family time. That was a time that you should help your fellow man. That was a time that you should be with your family and you should be doing things as a family. He was really big on family. His wife was expecting their 5th child at this period of time. He ended up with 10. But that was his favorite time of year, and one of the best times he remembered from his father, because his father was really big about Christmas.
Even though he
couldn't, even though he kept going that way. But, you know, Christmas was not that big of a thing.
Right.
In fact, we go through a period of time in the 1600s where Christmas is actually banned.
Yeah.
And then it comes back again in the early part of the 1700s for a little while, and then it just kind of fades out. And as you go through the latter part of the 1700s into the turn of the 1800s, it's just not that big of it's just not a holiday. Stores don't close, people don't get off. They really don't do much. But it's not till around, the 1807, 8, 10, right in through that area, that you see Christmas start to build back up again. So when Charles was a child, Christmas was just kind of getting off the ground. And those are some of the memories that he holds the dearest, because, again, it was a family time, a time to be together. What did you do on Christmas? Well, you had a big meal. You had a great big meal, and then you did things as a family. You played games, or perhaps even in the evening you might go visit other people, but mainly it was a family day. You went to church as a family, you had a great big meal, and then you did things as a family together. And Charles was all about family, and what he saw with these children was that they had no family life whatsoever. These children that were going to the ragged schools or that were working in the factories at this period of time. So he is approaching the period of time that he feels is the strongest, most sentimental time. In fact, you were saying a little while ago about Fred. Fred says, this is the time of year when we should be the most aware. The two men that come to collect for the poor say, it is at this time of year where want is most keenly felt. So he thought, okay, this is the time of year that people ought to be paying attention to those below them. And so he moves into that. He moves into that with them. And he decides that this is the very best time for him to do it. Why does he use ghosts? Why ghosts? I mean, you don't think about ghosts at Christmas. We think about ghosts at Halloween. But in the Victorian period, winter was the ghost time, particularly Christmas Eve. Because at Christmas Eve, it was decided, or thought, or superstitious, whichever way you want to call it, that the line between this world and the afterworld blurred out. And that the ghosts on the other side could come back to this world and finish any unfinished business that they had. Whether it was coming to tell somebody that they owed them money, or to right a wrong, or to tell somebody that they were sorry, or to haunt somebody, make them miserable, or like Marley does, to come back to redeem somebody that he cared about. So that's why he sets this at this period of time. And the Victorians were wild about ghosts. They loved ghost stories. This was, at wintertime, that's what you did. You sat around at night and you told ghost stories. And part of this came
some
from...
people still do.
And still like to do that. Not necessarily at Christmas. Now, I don't know if you all sit around at Christmas time and tell ghost stories, but they did. And, you know, we've got the Gothic movement that has come through in the late 1700s. And so we are full force in the Gothics right now. And we're reading about all these horrible things and that go creep in the night, and these castles with the dark walls and stuff.
Well, and some of that is like that romantic period is a reaction to this non-romantic period that's coming before it. And some of our 18th century time period is very kind of dry in its, you know, religious things going on and this, you know, unromantic, and then
very
then we
serious.
Very
Everything
serious.
is
And
serious.
then, I mean, you mentioned Christmas kind of, you know, getting to the, you know, starting to get more popular there in that early 19th century, which makes complete sense.
Right,
with these
it is
other
a reaction.
things coming along.
Yeah,
Right.
it is
It's
a
this
reaction back. The Enlightenment period was no emotion.
Right.
No emotion. Do not let emotion rule your reason.
Yeah.
So you throw out anything that has to do with emotion. And it is indeed this romantic period that comes in at the end of this Gothic period that begins to roll it backwards, and we begin to see them moving forward into, hey, we're going to let emotion out.
Right.
We got to have emotion. We've got to let that go out a little bit. So
Right.
that's
we
what
took
you
this
see.
thing out of our lives, and it's not good.
It's not
We've
good.
gotta
We
have
don't like
something
it.
here. Yeah.
We don't like it anymore.
Yeah.
So you've got that comes back in, and you see a lot of emotion in A Christmas Carol. You see a lot of emotion. One of the things that Dickens really tries to do is work your sympathy, which is an emotion. That's why every time he makes a point through the book, he uses a child. He always shows children in some way or another.
Which I think is an interesting juxtaposition. I mean, you go 100 years earlier, and they weren't necessarily all that caring about children.
No, they really didn't care that much about children at all.
That's kind of changed here.
Right.
There's a whole change in the, children start to become a little more important to the family.
Right.
And the mother it's more like, oh, I'm going to read books about caring for children
Right.
and things like that. And so it's interesting that's a shift.
It is a shift. It's a shift in thought process, but again, at the same time, we've shifted with against the poor.
Yeah.
And so we care about
They're not
us and
even
our
people,
kids, but
yeah.
we don't care about those children at all. They're not even people. They don't. And again, you have lines in A Christmas Carol where Scrooge repeats exactly what has been written through this period of time, either in a paper or someone has been quoted saying this about the fact, well, if they're going to die, they better go ahead and do it and decrease the surplus population. That is a direct quote from a man of power in this period of time.
Can you imagine that person just like, this guy just used
Just
my words in
yeah.
his story.
Yeah.
Now we think of it as something Scrooge would say. But, it'd be like if you were a senator or somebody and, somebody writes a book and uses your words in it and whoa.
To show everybody how
Right.
bad
How
you are.
bad you are, yeah.
To let the bad character say that. And that's amusing with that. But he does that several times through the books. There are times that you can see, sometimes he steps away from the story and he writes something else down there that doesn't really, it may have something to do with what's going on, but you can tell he has stepped back, and as the author, he's putting his thoughts right there in that paragraph. And again, so much of that is what he's hearing or reading or seeing at this period of time. So it's interesting to see that. So what was it about these poor people that he was so concerned about? One of the facts that I looked up that I thought was interesting was that 50% of all the poor children died before the age of 5. 50%. That's a lot of children that died, and the average age of death for a grown person in these situations was 22. So that's considerably long.
It's like if they get to a certain age, they're going to live longer, but so many die young that
it pulls that age down.
moves
Yeah,
that average down.
pulls that age down. So that's very, very sobering with that. And you've got some of the jobs that we were talking about that they were doing are so dangerous.
Ugh.
They put these children in these jobs that should never have children in them. In fact, as an adult, it would be dangerous. Yeah. And you have these horror stories of what happens to them. You've got the little chimney sweeps that are being stuffed up chimneys to clean them. That are starved, so they would stay small, so they could get them up there, and they get up there and get stuck and they suffocate, and it's just terrible.
Lost another one.
Lost
Need
another one. Go back to the orphanage
Right.
and get another one because there's lots
Make sure
of
he's
orphans.
small. Yeah.
Somebody small. Somebody small.
Yeah, they had, so much of that was like the weaving industry, and you've got these giant looms that are very, very, they're working at high speeds, very dangerous. All the works are open, and the children are working, tying threads and all this stuff. Just massively dangerous situation.
Oh yeah, and some of those they were, I don't remember what they called them, undercrawlers or crawlers, where they had to stay on the floor and pick out the fuzz so it wouldn't get the machines, get up in the machine. So they're underneath that, crawling, pulling these things out, sweeping it out on their stomachs, and they get the little bitty ones to go underneath there for that. Just things that we would cringe to know about today, or I would hope that our society would raise up and throw a fit about that.
Exactly.
But what option do you have? If you don't send your children to work and you don't work at these horrible jobs, what options do you have? You've got, what does Scrooge ask about? Are there no workhouses?
Yes.
That's one of the things he said. Are there no workhouses? Are there no
What
government?
about the poor law?
Yeah. What about the poor law? What about the treadmill? Oh, which was in
The
its
treadmill,
own.
yeah.
Oh my goodness, that was a terrible punishment for anybody in prison to have to do. But the workhouses were where they thought they were taking care of the poor. If you could not, the poor law said in 1834, if you could not make a living, if you did not feel that you could if you were starving and you could not make your way like this, then you could come and ask to be put into the poorhouse and you could be brought in there. But the poorhouses at this period of time, oh my goodness, they're humiliating is what they are. They are to make you feel ashamed and to make you feel as though you are doing something wrong by being poor.
I wouldn't want to encourage it.
No, they don't want to encourage you, so they give you menial jobs that are demeaning to do, and they treat you like you're in prison while you're in there. And people did everything they could to keep from going in there, even to the point of dying in alleys on the street. They'd rather die than have to go in there. And again, Scrooge says,
Yeah.
let them go. If they'd rather die than decrease
Get
the
it-
surplus
get it done.
population.
Right.
Yeah,
And,
so.
and a treadmill, imagine a giant hamster wheel and you're a person on the outside of it, climbing, turning it to power things. Oh, yeah.
Holding on to a bar so that you don't fall and taking steps for 8, 9, 10
Yeah,
hours a day.
it's like being on a step machine forever.
Forever and not being able to get off. Yeah, they were awful. They were awful. And you know, Dickens keeps pointing out to the fact, you know, whose job is it to take care of people? Whose job is it? And Scrooge, again, this is the thing he brings up. It's the government's job. It's the government's job. It's not our problem. It's the government's problem. And he says, are there no prisons? You know, are there no workhouses? That's the
pay my
government answer. I
taxes.
pay my taxes and
Right.
my money. In fact, that's what he says. My money goes there to support those already. What about the church? It's the church's job. And the church says, you know, we're doing what we can, but we can only handle so much at a time. And then he's like,
Not my problem.
not my problem, not my problem. And Dickens felt it was an individual's responsibility, that if people would just share what they had, share their wealth, then they could bring these people up and out of it just a little bit. So what do you want to talk about next?
Well, you know, you've read the story a million times, right?
Oh.
What's the thing that most recently has just popped out to you that you hadn't thought about before?
Probably the last ghost. The last ghost. I had never thought about any more than what he was. I mean, he looks like the Grim Reaper.
Right.
That's what he looks like. And he doesn't talk, and he has no features except for this bony hand that points, you know, places like that. And I've always just kind of passed it off that, well, he's the ghost of Christmas yet to come because everybody's going to die, right?
Right.
But it had never dawned on me the fact that he doesn't speak, because if he spoke, then that would make the future, that would be the way it would have to be.
Solidified.
Yeah, it would solidify it. So he doesn't talk. He also doesn't talk because he's not going to tell Scrooge. He wants Scrooge to figure it out by himself. And so he doesn't say anything. He lets Scrooge draw his own conclusions. And Scrooge starts out asking questions like he does to the other spirits. But by the end, he's kind of answering his own questions. I mean, it never tells him who the man on the bed was. Scrooge gets all that together. He puts all that together at the very end of that.
Well, he should get clued in.
He should
seemed
get
pretty
clued
dim
in.
to me right there, but
Yeah, he should have figured it out by that point, you know, but he proposed to remain ignorant of that. But he doesn't speak because he can't. That would set the future in place that would not be able to be changed. He looks like the Grim Reaper because the only thing that's sure is death. And the only thing he shows is death. He shows Scrooge at his death, and he shows Tiny Tim at his death. And he shows the difference between someone that no one loves and someone that they do love, and how they die, and the way that they die. But the other thing that I didn't realize is the fact that he is not a ghost. Even though he's called the ghost of Christmas yet to come, Scrooge calls him the Phantom. The Phantom. And so I went looking that up. Why, you know, the other two he calls Spirit.
Right.
Spirit, why did you do this? Or Spirit, why? This one he calls a Phantom. He does refer to him once as a spirit, but why a phantom? And a phantom is an imagination. It is an unreal thing. It is not something like a ghost that has lived and then died, or has been an idea of something that is not there anymore. This is strictly just an ideal, a made-up something, an illusion. There is nothing real about him. And that's the reason that Scrooge can change, and that particular future doesn't come back to him. Which I thought was really interesting, that it came out that way. I didn't realize that there was such an emphasis on that particular spirit, on that phantom, beyond the fact that he represented death. But the other thing that I found out in reading that, I finally connected some dots, and that was only this morning, was when does the phantom come? When he's showing Scrooge his own death, and he's showing Tiny Tim dead, when is that? When
is it
that?
20 years?
Is it 20 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 6 years? No, it is the next Christmas. It is the next Christmas. And the hint we get to that actually comes from the Christmas Present, the ghost of Christmas Present, who, when Scrooge is asking about Tiny Tim, will Tiny Tim live? And the ghost says, I see a crutch well preserved in an empty corner. And about a paragraph or two after that, he says, unless these things change, none of my race will ever see him. In which he means
the next Christmas.
Right. Yeah, in which he means Christmas. So we're talking about a year that this would happen in. And I thought that was interesting. And not only that,
but I mean, the things that, Scrooge is looking for himself. He goes and he sees his counting house, or a counting house, and the world is already, it's already passed him by. He's vaporized. No one could care less. It was like he never existed in the first place.
Everybody's moved right on.
That happened in a year.
In a year.
Boom. And everything's changed.
Yeah, and he's only been dead not even long enough to be buried.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just been dead like the night before. So he's
already.
dying. And already, whoo, everybody's moved right on without him. Nobody cares. Nobody, it's just a matter of putting him in the ground, and that's what we're waiting for.
I love that second conversation that's going on with the gentleman in the exchange, the change, as he says it. And it's just like 2 sentences. It's like, Scrooge is dead.
Old Scratch
and that's it.
Yeah, that is it.
It's just like, and then, hey, do you ice skate?
Yeah. And do you notice, too, the fact that they both know who they're talking about? When they say, I hear old Scratch got his own at last, they know who. They don't have to name names.
Who? What?
Yeah. They know exactly who he's talking about. So what a horrible reputation to have that everybody would know, which is a sad thing. And two, here at the very end, when Bob comes in and talks about where Tiny Tim is going to be laid, and he talks about what a pretty place it is and how it overlooks the river, and he's promised that he'd come there every week, and you have the image of this beautiful, it's so green, he says, and the tree and everything.
Even though it was winter.
Even though it was winter. But it's going to be nice. Where they're putting him is a caring, lovely, well taken care of place, is what he acknowledges. But when you go into the graveyard with Scrooge and the phantom, it's weeds and overgrown, and it's just as horrible. It obviously is untended and uncared about. So that's where you put the people you don't care about anymore. There's such a contrast there between being loved and being unloved that is interesting to me, I think, at least.
All right, so I'm going to jump in here real quick because we're about to leave for a quick intermission so we can be back at our normal time of 4 o'clock. But real quick, I'm going to blast through these super chats, and thank you so much for them. The Trauma Factory, thanks bartender, excellent storyteller too, Carol. Amber Crystal Daughter, it's like Sir Philip Sidney wrote so long ago. Fiction can be more true than a simple recitation of facts because it speaks to our feelings and distills so many experiences into one made-up story. Creel Unbeloved, thank you for decorating the tavern with beautiful seasonal greenery. Mark Willoughby, Merry Christmas. Thanks for all that you do. Yes, John, we can sign off for our quick intermission. And please talk about who painted the thing. I think I told you.
Oh, yeah. So for intermission, I think you're going to hear Sir Roger de Coverley, which is Rick, doing that piece that is mentioned in the story. And the artwork you're going to see is fan art. The Instagram person is Smudge. You can find her there. And it's Bethany Kinsvogel, right? Did I get that right? There you go. Such an amazing, fun piece of art that she drew while she was listening to one of the readings. That is so fun. I love that. So there you go. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. back. I hope you enjoyed that music. And
Sorry, I had my board off. We're good though.
okay,
Terrible transition.
welcome
Oh, no.
back. And hopefully you enjoyed the music and the image. We are back, and we're going to talk more about that. Before we get back to Carol and more of A Christmas Carol, I wanted to talk about the brand new Patreon people this week, because if I don't do it, I'll have a giant list next week. So, Marius, Engen. I hope I got that one right. It's like, did I write it down right, or am I saying it wrong? Who knows what? George Norris, R. Austin, Lily Case, Ellen Gow, Karen Murphy, Ashley Turner, Holly Swick. Thank you, brand new Patreon folks. Super duper thank you. You helped make these things happen. If you're interested in looking at supporting us on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. And before we get back to Carol, one more thing. Okay, so we worked our mug people to, I mean, they don't have child labor, so they could hardly keep up.
Oh my goodness gracious!
Back to those
I said
16-hour
they didn't.
workdays.
I said they didn't have.
I thought I heard you wrong.
Okay, we have a few of these. They won't. They're gonna be. They will be gone by the end of the live stream. If you want one, go to the link and get one fast.
Go in the chat right now.
There you go. Because they're really cool.
They're really good mugs.
Yeah,
They're
some of-
really good mugs.
One of them had super limited numbers.
Yeah, green, I think we
yeah.
just had a couple pieces. There's some blue ones and a few more of the chestnut ones. So if you want a blue one, hurry up. The greens are probably already gone, and there's a few more of the chestnuts. And I think they're all the ones with the jumping stag, the holiday. Now, will you get it for Christmas? Probably not, because the mailing system and everything is all a hooey, and who knows when you'll get them, but order it now.
If you miss them and you want to be notified when we get more in stock, just click that button,
Yeah.
and we will let you know.
Hit that notify me button.
Very good.
Okay, Carol. Can you read us a piece?
Sure. What part would you like to hear?
Oh, I don't know. What's your favorite part?
Oh, that's hard. There's so many places in here where I love where Dickens takes that step back. And he says something so very profound. But I think my favorite part, and it's probably the part that people miss the quickest, and it's where the first spirit takes him and sets him down on the grounds where he was born. What a lot of people miss is that that's the only spirit that touches him. Do you notice that?
Yeah.
And he touches him. Where does he touch him? On his heart. And when he says, "Oh, I'm mortal, I can't go with you," and the spirit says, "Bear but a touch of my hand here, and I will uphold you in more than this." So I'm not just touching you to
Right.
make you be able to go through a wall.
Right. This isn't magic.
No,
in
this isn't
way.
magic. I am touching you to
Change
release
something.
your heart
Right.
from the ice that is around it. And I think that's probably one of my favorite parts is when that happens. So let's see if I can bring this to life a little bit for you. Forgive me. I tend to do voices, so if I bother you with that, I'm sorry. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" said Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being close beside him, it were at a distance. Who and what are you?" demanded Scrooge. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anyone would have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and he begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and forced me the whole train of years to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend or any knowledge of having willfully bonneted the spirit to any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." And it put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour not adapted to pedestrian purposes, and that the bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, and that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and a nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, and finding that the spirit made toward the window, clasped its road in supplication. "I am immortal," Scrooge said, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this."
Yeah, yeah. And then they go, and
Yeah.
they go back in the past before the Industrial Revolution.
Right,
Everything
and
is
take him back to his
sparkly.
childhood. Let me point this out to you. If the ghost had not touched him there,
right.
Scrooge, nothing he showed him through that period would have made any difference at all. But it was that touch that starts him on the path of redemption. A lot of people think that Scrooge gets his redemption with the last phantom, there staring at his name in the graveyard. But that's not where it happens. It happens here.
Well, even he says to the ghost of Christmas Present, he says, "Oh, things are already working on it."
Right, right. I have already, and I am ready for the lessons that
Right,
you will teach me. Yes, he's already changed at that point. But the difference between the first ghost and the last one is that up until the last one, he hasn't said it out loud. He hasn't said, "I recant, I'm really
Right,
sorry.
right. I
can change, I can do this." He's thought it,
Yeah.
but he hasn't said it out loud yet. So it's not until he's frightened that ghost breaks him enough to make him verbalize. Because see, if he never verbalized it, he could have gone back the way he was. But once he says it to the future, he's going to follow that. So I've always thought that was kind of cool.
So a lot of people are very thankful for your reading, and they're hoping
are
for
welcome.
future readings from Carol. We'll talk about that. And Salome Perry, during your reading, said thank you from Brooklyn. Stay safe and warm.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so shall we talk about this from strictly a literature point of view?
One more, before we go any further, Aaron's got that one picture. We talked about this earlier before
yes.
before the live stream started. We were talking. I know it's hardly believable, but we talked about this particular image. You want to bring that one
The
up?
one I tried to tell you about yesterday?
Yes,
Or
yes.
when you were reading?
Tuesday, yeah.
Tuesday,
so,
yeah.
So this image here, which is the Ghost of Christmas Present, you can see kind of faded out there. And then the two children, Want and Ignorance, and Scrooge there in his nightcap and slippers, the perfect outfit there. It's like right out of the 18th century too. It's no change there. But Carol was talking about the background of this image, which most people, just goes right over your head. Tell me about the background.
Yeah, one of the things that was pointed out to me in my studies about this particular picture is the man who did the drawings for the book was Leach,
Right.
was his last name. He was a very famous artist at this period of time and an illustrator. And he was a close friend of Charles Dickens. And he knew what Charles was trying to do with this book, and he knew how he felt about where the problem had come from, and that it was all had stemmed out of the Industrial Revolution. So when he makes this is the pinnacle of the point that Charles Dickens is trying to make right here. And when he shows these children, the background is not London. The background is factories. Do you see that? And they think that he actually was drawing Manchester, England, where was the seat of all the factories. That was where the biggest amount of factories were. And so they think Leach put those in there because what this conversation between the Ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge over these children, Want and Ignorance, had directly to do with the Industrial Revolution and the factories. The Industrial Revolution has caused the want. It has caused the need of the people, of these poor people. And the ignorance, the boy on the other side, is the rich and wealthy group. If you take the word ignorance and you break it down to the singular word, it's ignore. Right. And they are ignoring the plight of the girl, the want, the need, the poor. And that's why the ghost says, if this does not change, I see disaster for this group.
We don't see in that image the background being, pastoral. There's not a field or farm workers or anything like this. Right. This is the workplace.
Right, and we don't even see the streets of London.
Right.
We don't see the houses close together. No. We don't see anything like that at all. It's just these factories. And in that picture, he's showing us what Charles is trying to say. Right. Here is the result of that right there. And if you don't stop, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, and there's this, this time period, and the 18th century and going to this time period is that change, a massive change from agriculture to industry. And what does that do? What does it do to families? What does it do to society in general? How have these people become, if in the 18th century, the upper class people thought of people as the lower people as animals, by the time you get to the 19th century, they're machines, right?
They're
it's like,
machines,
now we're people and they're just machines.
Right. They're just there to make my life easier.
Right.
That's all your job is to make me easier. And if you die in the meanwhile, who cares? We'll get another one to do it.
That's right.
But yeah, that's what they were thinking. And oh, how fast they came to those thoughts. It's amazing how the society moved in that direction so very quickly.
And yet, in some ways, it's progress.
Right.
We can make cloth so much more cheaply.
Right.
We can do all these things. All this, there's this great industrial progress, but all at a massive cost.
At a massive cost, and generally the cost was the people. Like I said, Dickens was not against people being wealthy. He didn't have any problem with that at all. What he had was people being greedy with their wealth. That was what he fought against and really went against. So. So that's a great picture, and it's like I said, that was one that was just pointed out to me not too very long ago, and I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I think some of the best part about a piece like this is that you can keep coming back to it and keep finding more and more. There's more message here. We were talking about it earlier about how today we'll watch a movie or a play, whatever, and we will get like 10% of the story. It's like, oh, well, there's this guy and he's kind of greedy and, and then he learns to be happy and things are all good again, right? He's redeemed by being jovial, which isn't what is really going on. And there's just layer upon layer of understanding in this story that as we go down, it's like, oh, that's what he's talking about here. This is what he's talking about there.
Right, and that's what we call an allegory. This book is an allegory. It is a story that is set up to represent something else, and an ideal or a situation, and in this case, definitely an ideal. It's to show society where they're going wrong and to make it different.
So Scrooge is everyone in this case.
Well,
like
he
all
is the
these
wealthy.
people. Right.
He is all the wealthy upper class. Yeah, he is the symbol of the wealthy upper class, and drawn. What is interesting at the beginning, it talks about he's solitary as an oyster. He doesn't care about what's going on around him. He doesn't care about anybody else. He doesn't even know that Bob's got a crippled son. And how long has he worked for him?
Right.
He is not caring about anybody but himself. So he represents what Dickens saw the upper class mindset at this period of time, and it was that way. That's the way it was.
Leading empty lives,
singularly turned in, caring only about themselves. Yeah. So that's exactly who Scrooge represents. So what is the purpose then in showing Scrooge like he is here, and then showing him at the end? That's where you start talking about what's the theme. What we know that he was trying to show the wealthy their fault, or what he saw was something, but you said it a little while ago, and that was the word redemption. And that is the theme that Charles Dickens points in this book. Not so much that he's saying, bad you're horrible people for not doing this. What he's saying is you can change. Anybody can change. Even someone who is as old and nasty and miserly as this man here can change and make the rest of his life mean something. Marley refers to that in his little speech that he gives when he's first telling Scrooge who he is. And he says something about, double chained and double binded, why did I never notice this? Why was there no star that showed me the poor man's house? Why am I the way I am now? It's because I never did this. If I had only done this. And that's the theme of the whole book, is you can change. You can do something to make it different. You can change your life, and by doing so, look what you can benefit the people around you, which Marley is benefiting Scrooge by coming back and doing that.
Right. And notice that Scrooge isn't doing it by himself.
No.
Right? So, Scrooge, if Marley doesn't go and visit him, and, like in the beginning, it's like, you got to understand that Marley's dead.
Marley's dead.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't understand Marley's dead, then none of this actually works for us, right?
That's exactly right. That's
so,
why it takes 5 paragraphs to tell us that.
Right. So,
He's dead, he's dead.
Coffin
He
nail,
is so dead.
Yeah, he's so dead. Yeah.
So, this idea that, number one, Marley's got to come to change Scrooge, or start this machine in motion, and then the Ghost of Christmas Past has to do something to him to actually make him change.
To be able to do that. But
Right.
look at the fact that even Marley the ghost comes to visit him, and it doesn't really faze Scrooge one little bit. So Marley goes, "Oh, look what's happened to me, and your chain
Right.
is twice as big as mine." And Scrooge is like, "Oh, okay."
That potato.
Yeah,
It's not really
it was
going
more about
somewhere.
the gravy than the grave about you. Yeah, he doesn't. It really doesn't faze him very much. So again, I go back to the point that if it had just been the ghost showing up, I don't think anything really would have happened.
Just a bad night's sleep.
Just a bad night's sleep. But because that first Ghost of Christmas Past touches him, that ghost has the power to take the past and change, and change his heart, and open it up for him to get the lessons of the ghosts that are coming after that, which I thought was really, really interesting. So we have this theme of redemption that runs through the book. But the second theme that runs through the book is one of regret, as I talked about a little while ago. Marley is regretful for what happens to him. Scrooge, as soon as they sit down in that school, as soon as he sees himself, he
weeping.
regrets. And he regrets the little boy that had come and sung at his door the night before, and that he didn't give him something. And then they go to Fezziwigs. I love that name, don't you? I want a fuzzy dog. I want some kind of fuzzy dog that I can name Fezziwig. Then he goes to Fezziwigs, and when the ghost says, why is everybody so happy? All the man did was give you, what,
Right.
3 or 4 pounds, give you a party.
And
Whoopie-doo.
Scrooge is mad.
Scrooge is like, he has the right to make our lives good or bad. And then he catches what he's saying, and he's like, whoops. And he regrets the way he's treated Bob Cratchit at that point. So every time you move through one of these ghosts, you see regret. And it's not always on Scrooge's part, but it is always regretful. There is regret. And Dickens is really pushing that home, going, you can live your life full of regrets, or you can do something about it.
Right. You don't see him talking about regrets after, in the third act, when he's changed. It's like, you wasted all that life. You didn't have fun through all that. What was the point, right?
Right.
It's like, you're rich and you weren't having fun. And yet, he's not continuing to feel sorry for himself at that point. It's completely different.
It's a completely different change. Yeah, and there at the very last in stave 5, he never goes back and talks about where he came from, or, I wish I'd have done this ahead of time. Like you said, it's like he takes that day and runs with it, and just continues to run forward with his newfound openness and his newfound heart that is there. One of the things that I love to do this to my students, is the fact that when we go through books like this and we have these themes, that a good author will make the theme clear enough that when you get to the end of the book, you can pick it out, you can find it. And like I said, in this particular book, what I think is interesting is that they all start with R, which for me is interesting. The fact that you've got the themes of redemption and regret that run through the very beginning. That's the theme of the book. And when you get to the Ghost of Christmas Past, it's what does the ghost say? Why are you here? And she says,
For restoration.
For your restoration or reclamation. Yeah, I'm going to reclaim you. And that's when Scrooge starts feeling regretful. Then you've got the Ghost of Christmas Present who comes in. And what is the Ghost of Christmas Present showing them? He is revealing what Christmas Day really is, because Scrooge doesn't have a clue because he's never celebrated that, not for long. Yeah, it's a humbug. So he reveals what Christmas Day is, and he reveals what the people do on Christmas, the regular people do. He reveals Bob Cratchit's family that Scrooge has no idea of at all. He reveals all that. So we've got a revelation through that period of time. And on Scrooge's part, it's realization of what he's missed and what he doesn't know and what is part of that. And then the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, he does what all of us dread, and that's ramifications. This is what's going to happen to you because of the things that you've done up to this point. And so how does Scrooge respond to that? With repentance and recanting his life. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. I won't. I'm not the man I was. Yeah. I won't be this. And so he verbalizes this recanting. I recant the way I was. I'm going to be something different. So
and he's not even talked to anybody. That's right. When he wakes up, and it's like, no. I'll say these things right now.
Yes, I will live. I promise I'll live. And he goes right on with that. So I've always thought that was interesting how these R's thematically go through the book, and I don't know if Dickens meant for it to be that way or if that's just the way I figured it out, but I think it's interesting. I want to talk just real quick about, I said this is an allegory book, which means Dickens wrote a story with the characters representing parts of the society, and we've already said Scrooge definitely represents the rich, wealthy, sucked into themselves, no good. Bob Cratchit, the clerk, he represents the poor. He is the one that's living on what they call starvation wages. He has not even enough to be able to feed his children during the week. Part of that we can tell from Tiny Tim. There's been a lot of people, a lot of doctors that have written about what was wrong with Tiny Tim, what was wrong with Tiny Tim. And they've all pretty much come to the conclusion that it was some type of a disease that was probably caused by malnutrition. And it was something that with good food and a little bit of help, he could have come out of. But Bob is too poor to be able to pay for that. By the very fact that his oldest daughter is already apprenticed out, he's having to apprentice his children out to work because he can't afford to feed them all at home. He's already talking about Peter going out. You know, he found a situation for Peter, a job, an apprenticeship, and he's going to, after Christmas is over, we're going to see if we can get you into this. So he's farming his kids out, if you want to call that, again, because he can't take care of them. And he wants to put them in a situation where they can learn a job, something that they can take care of themselves in a way. So Cratchit is
the working people.
He's the working people, and he's not only the working people, but he's the working people that don't have a choice. I mean, Scrooge treats him like dirt, and he doesn't get up, stand up, and go, I won't be treated like this. I'm going to go get another job, because he can't. There's not enough jobs to go around as it is. So he takes whatever Scrooge gives him, and this is the main bulk of the working poor, is that they took whatever they could get to survive. It didn't matter how badly they were treated or how badly they were hurt or whether they were fed. It was just to have a job, Jacob Marley, the ghost, is there to show Scrooge what's going to happen to him. This is what you've got in your eternity if you don't change your ways. He drags that heavy chain along behind him, with the money boxes and stuff, to show his greed. Scrooge, or Dickens, really wanted people to understand that it was greed that was putting these people in this situation. And he talks about Scrooge has so much more around him already. But one of the things that ghost says that I think is so pertinent, Marley says, mankind should have been my business. You know, when Scrooge says, but you were always a good man of business. And he goes, business, mankind should have been my business. You know, and he pushes that home. There again, Dickens is underlining what he's trying to tell these people by showing these two characters in that conversation, which I think is neat. He preaches without being preachy. Fred, the nephew. A lot of speculation about Fred as to why Scrooge hates him so badly. Why is he so disgusted with Fred? Fred comes in to wish him a Merry Christmas.
That part cracks me up.
Yeah, he comes in to wish him a Merry Christmas, and Scrooge, bah humbug, you know, that's where we hear that, I think, for the first time. And then instead of, he says, why don't you come and dine with us tomorrow? He's just giving this invitation. How does Scrooge answer? Why did you get married?
Yeah, that's what he cares about.
Why did you get married? Well, I fell in love. You know, so why why does he throw that back at Fred that way?
Well, and we also see her references sitting down in a particular spot. She isn't up. And
Yeah.
It's like she isn't maybe, totally healthy or something, other issue with her. She's not, and she's probably dour, she doesn't have a dowry or anything. She wasn't a good match.
She was not a good match. A lot of scholars think she was pregnant.
Yeah.
That's the reason she was sitting down and did not get up. But we go back to Scrooge's background. Who was the only person that ever cared about him? His little sister, right? And I believe when they're talking about the little sister Fan, that the ghost says she had a great heart and died, I believe, a woman, and had children.
Right.
And Scrooge says, one. There's a lot of speculation that perhaps she died in childbirth. And that's one of the things that he holds against Fred. We don't know that. That's just speculation. But it does
Right,
kind
he's
of
the cause
connect
of that.
some dots, that maybe that's why he feels the way he does about that. Plus, he lost his girlfriend, his betrothed, so maybe he's jealous of Fred because he didn't. We don't know. We don't know that for sure. But he represents what people should be like at Christmas. Warm and open, and that's why Fred gets the coolest little paragraph in the whole thing about fellow travelers. Christmas may not have done me good, it may never do me good, but I say God bless it, and that's where Bob Cratchit gets in trouble for going, yay, but he represents what Christmas ought to be, and the way people should feel toward Christmas, and that Dickens keeps holding him up as the this is how you celebrate Christmas. This is what a Christmas day should be like, and this kind of thing. And then probably the star of the book, without being the star of the book, is Tiny Tim.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Tiny Tim.
It's like you only see him for a minute, and he is the whole story.
He is the whole story. That's right. The whole story goes around him. Tiny Tim also represents the poor, but he represents the sympathy for the poor, or for the sympathy we should have for the poor. He's crippled, and he's obviously in the lower class, and he's crippled and has to use a little crutch. The little crutch for Dickens represents what the government is doing for the poor people. It's a crutch. It's poor relief. It's a workhouse situation. It doesn't make him better. It just helps him cripple around a little bit. And so he uses that as a dive toward us, as an arrow into people's hearts. Here's this poor little crippled child. And what he's trying to say is, this is how we ought to feel about the poor. Right here is how we ought to feel about the poor, and quit allowing these government-funded workhouses or poor reliefs or whatever it is. We're not fixing the problem. All we're doing is giving them something to crip around on like that, and that's wrong. That's not the way it ought to be. So that's why Tiny Tim is the way he is. He said, and again, he makes it out to the point that all he needed was a wealthy benefactor, and he got better.
Right.
So
All
we
he
are
needed
supposed
was eat that giant turkey.
all he needed to do was eat that giant turkey. Yeah, and if we cared about the poor and we took care of them, they would get better too. They would get better too. So that's why he uses Tiny Tim in that way.
And Tiny Tim sings the song.
Oh, and God blesses everyone. Yeah.
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 I'm going to jump in real quick with some super chats real quick, and then we'll get back into it. Elizabeth Busho, another wonderful show and a great guest. My family loves this channel. Jared Foley, finally got my Nutmeg Tavern mug. Here's a tip for the bartender. So great to enjoy the tavern with you wonderful folks at the end of my week. Thank you. Jack Delgado, thanks so much for keeping relevant the important things in life, like this story, and it's a great message. SGFX, thanks for explaining the Christmas Carol and the significance that it has had in the society and even Christmas itself. Love the channel. And Jaji, it seems most versions omit the usual melancholy dinner passage and opt for the Grulla's dinner instead for a cold. Carol,
Right.
do you have thoughts?
Yes, it is. He has a cold. In fact, it even mentions that he has a cold. He eats dinner at the inn on the way home from work that day. It talks about the fact that he stops and eats his usual dinner.
Right.
The gruel is for his cold, yes, that he eats there by the fire. He's not eating supper. He's already had supper. So he's taking something a little for his cold. That's why he mentions to the ghost of Christmas past, I've got a cold. I really need to stay in bed.
Yeah. Right, and even when he wakes up at the end and he's like, there's that gruel pot.
There's that
You
gruel
know,
pot.
it's like-
Yeah, that's right where I saw it. Yeah, he's all excited about that gruel.
Gruel isn't bad. Really, it's not that bad.
I guess if you put enough nutmeg in it, it's fine.
And and that's the other thing. The Ghost of Christmas Present. He's got this cornucopia torch thing, and he sprinkles food with it. It's got a special spice in it, and we all know what that is.
John is convinced it's nutmeg.
It's nutmeg.
Yeah,
You know it's nutmeg.
Okay, well, one thing I have to say real quick, Carol.
Yes.
We only have about 20 minutes left.
Oh, my
There's
word.
ground to cover, and we still have to come full circle to which character represents Dickens in the story.
Ah, yes.
And
Yes.
Amber Crystal Daughter just sent in a tip for the oppressed laborers in the nutmeg mines. Well, there we go.
Hey.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so we talked about that Dickens puts into every book someone that represents his childhood or someone that represents something about him or that he can relate to. Where is he in this book? In this book, when Scrooge goes with the Ghost of Christmas Past, and he goes to the school, which again represents those horrible, horrible schools that they used to put, these boarding schools they used to put the children in and leave them there. We find Scrooge as a child. We don't know exactly how young he is, but based on when his sister comes back to get him, and the fact that he's going home to be apprenticed would make him somewhere around 13. When did you say?
When he's leaving the
Yeah,
school,
when he leaves with
right.
Fanny, he's about 13-ish. And because when they roll forward,
through time, yeah.
they talk about the building falling down so much more. It just
right.
gets so much more. We know that at least 5, 6
Right.
years.
You'd say he's 7, 8 years old.
Yeah,
in
so
that
he's
first
probably
time,
6, 7, 8 in that first time there. And he's left all alone there. All the other boys have gone home for Christmas. Why is he left there? Because his father would not let him come home. We learn that from Fanny when she comes back when he's a little older. But the fact that his father did not want him and did not want him to come home, that's why he gets left there alone. And I always ask my students, if you were at a boarding school, if you were at a place where you had to stay 24/7 all year round, and the only time of the year you were allowed to go home were just a few days for Christmas, and your father would not let you come home, you had to stay there in that awful place by yourself when everybody else is going to their family, what time of year would you hate the most?
Right.
You'd hate Christmas, wouldn't it? Because that would throw that in your face. And that is Dickens as a child. That is the unloved, unwanted, don't want you home, don't want you here that he felt when he tried to come back home after the blacking factory and his mother wanted him to go back. So that is him in a nutshell there for us to see.
Well, and I wonder too about he immediately talks, you see him referring in that part of it to going into yourself into literature. He didn't have anyone to interact with,
Right.
and so
Right.
he lives his life through literature. Obviously, it's Arabian Nights and
Right.
stories like that. And I'm wondering about whether Dickens's some of his inspiration and where he gets, his literature is from early
those
reading
early
of
reading
those
of
kinds of
those
things. He's
books,
kind
yeah.
of seeing himself there. It's like, yeah, I had to live through books. Just to have a life.
Those were my only friends.
Right.
He's at that school with all those other boys, and my first thought would be, why didn't they ask him to go home? But when the ghost says to Scrooge, there is still someone there, and he is forgotten by all his friends, it kind of gives you an idea of the fact that maybe Scrooge doesn't get along with those boys.
Right.
For whatever reason. He's not intimately friendly with them. And that's why he gets left behind. They have forgotten him. So that,
Is it the boys forgetting him or his family forgetting him?
well, it says he's forgotten
Yeah.
by his friends.
Right, okay,
Is exactly
okay.
what it says. So you have to wonder, did they not care, or was there a
Yeah.
not a good relationship between he and the other children. You know, we don't know. Again, that's speculation. It's just speculation. We do know his father wouldn't let him come home. That we know.
And he is interacting with, well, he wants to interact with them. He's calling them by name.
Right, he knows who they
He's
are.
kind of jovial until he sees himself there. He's like, oh,
And then
this
he
was
cries.
bad.
Then he cries, yeah. Funny that he never wants the ghosts to see him cry. He does.
Right,
There's
right.
two
It's a
times.
pimple.
It's a pimple, yeah. It's just something, that he didn't want to, that cracking, that ability for the heart to hurt. You know, if you lock yourself off hard enough, you can keep the hurt out as well as you can keep the good out.
But notice multiple times the ghosts are looking at him. You know, they're it's like, do I need to keep pushing buttons on this guy?
Yeah.
You know,
What do I need to do?
I'm working on this guy. He was concerned about the phantom looking at him. You know, it's
Right,
like, oh,
right.
he's looking at me. I'd rather he's looking somewhere
Where he
else.
thinks his eyes are, he's
Right.
not sure because it's empty. Why is he
Right,
empty?
right.
Because the future is empty.
But obviously he's looking.
But obviously
at
it's
me,
looking
yeah.
because he does nod his head once like that, and he said if he had eyes. But that's interesting that you brought that up, because that's one of the points. Dickens wants to show so badly the wealthy class the truth because they refuse to look at it. They refuse to look at it. So his ghosts, the first one, what does it have? Light coming out of its head. That's to show truth. That's to show light on the darkness, so you can't hide in there. And Scrooge likes the dark. Remember, that's where he can hide everything. And he, at the very beginning, he says, could you cover that light up? That's a little too bright. And that's the part that I read. And so anytime that he gets some kind of revelation from that first ghost or regret, when he turns, it's always standing really close to him with
watching
that
him.
light right there.
Would you stop that?
And the second ghost, when he comes, the ghost of Christmas Present, you know, he has this big torch. He has a torch. And what does he do? He lights up everything. Everywhere he goes, he lights with this torch. The only ghost that doesn't have light is the last one. Is the last one, yeah. So we have truth that comes with the first one, truth that comes with the second one, and the third one is not written yet.
Even strangely, Marley has a glow about him.
Even has a glow.
He's not complete. He's got to light himself up because he's a ghost.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
in the
but he
dark.
carries. It says he
Right.
carries this air around him,
Yeah.
like a
An
what was it? A
infernal air.
bad lobster in the cellar.
Oh, and lobsters glowing in the dark. Isn't that interesting? I
That
love
is something I didn't know before I
Yeah,
read that book.
yeah.
I didn't realize they glowed. But yeah, that's very interesting. But here again, you have light in all of these areas until we get to the very end where the future is dark, and it's almost like, okay, Scrooge, it's up to you at this
He's
point.
so dark, in fact, that he's nebulous.
Yes.
He doesn't, all you can really see is this hand. It's just
Yeah,
like a
there's not much to
fuzzy
it.
outline, and I don't even know what it is.
Right. Scrooge even says he's not sure how he gets from
Right.
place to place. He thinks that he rides along in his
yes,
robes,
carried
but he's
along.
not sure.
Yeah, he doesn't
he's
know.
not sure because you can't really see, because the future is uncertain. So there is no light at that part yet. There is no light to shine at that part. So I've always thought that was interesting, that we have so much light at the beginning to show, to try to show Scrooge, this is the truth, this is what is happening. So the future's left up to you. The future is yours. You know.
And yet, and there's no break between the ghost of the future, the phantom, and daylight. Right? It's just like he's in the dream, and then boom,
Bam, he's there.
that's the bedpost, and it's morning, and the light is coming in. You know,
Right.
it's gone. You know, there's none of this. Oh, well, he fell asleep, and then he woke back up, and it was daylight.
He's there hanging on to the
Right.
bed curtains on the post of his bed for that. And you notice too that the first ghost takes him home, but the second ghost of Christmas Present, does not. And the third one doesn't. He just disappears, and
Right.
bam, he's there.
It's such a deep and interesting story, and I mean one of the reasons why it's still popular, even though we miss it, even though we miss 90% of it,
Right.
it's still so powerful that it's watched over and over and over and over. Again.
Exactly. It's probably had more movies made about it than any other single book. Charles Dickens was the last author, or the only author, that was popular during his period of time. He was alive. Most people get popular after they die and they go back and read their books, but he was popular while he was alive. And this book changed a lot of things. It changed the way we looked at Christmas. It changed the Victorian society on Christmas Day. And Christmas changed overnight. The way that people celebrated it and what they did with it. They quit eating goose and they moved to turkey. Said it put the goose people out of business because he sent a turkey. Yeah, turkey to Bob
Poor people are
Cratchit's.
eating a goose. The rich people have a giant turkey.
That's right. One last thing about food real quick is that Dickens points out that the goose is what poor people ate. Turkeys were only for the rich. And the goose don't have a lot of meat on them. It's a very poor meal. And that you have to it talks about the Cratchit family filling out the edges with applesauce and potatoes and onions and dressing and stuff like that. But Dickens at one place says in one of his writings that this was probably the only day of the year that the poor actually had full stomachs, would be on Christmas Day.
Yeah. And there was that point, we were discussing it there for a moment, about the really weird conversation that happens between Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present and the, why are you keeping people from working?
Yeah.
Right?
Why are you trying to shut the bakers down?
Right.
Because if you don't let the bakers stay open, all these poor people won't have any place to cook their dinner. Why are you trying to shut it down? And it really doesn't have anything to do with the story at all.
And it was very, very that time when there were Sabbatarian laws,
Right.
these laws that try to close down commerce on Sunday,
Right.
All that kind of good stuff. Before we get too far, thought I'd mention this book. This is a giant set. This is just volume 1. I think there's 4, 5 volumes?
I think
4
there's
volumes?
4. Mm-hmm.
Something like that. London Labor and the London Poor by Henry Mayhew. And this is done in exactly this time period. So he did his research in the 1839, 40s.
39, 40s, early
Right.
40s. And then published this in 1851.
Right, yeah. An amazing book that goes through and sort of talks about all these different things that poor people are doing, good, bad, industries, people that are doing things to just get by. It's an amazing sort of, he has these, he goes out and interviews people, and
on the street.
Right, they tell their story. Boy, if we had something like this for the 18th century, whoa.
Wouldn't we love that?
But it still is very illuminating even for that 18th century. It's not like the things these people were doing in 1839 had sprung out of, thin air.
Right.
A lot of these things go right back 100 years earlier, 200 years earlier. They're just slightly morphed. Now, there are some things that do sort of pop up within that time period. They are completely different. Giant changes in, it's like lamp lighters aren't lighting the same kind of lamp, but they're doing the same kind of work.
Right.
So incredibly just heartbreaking but illuminating work if you are interested in the poor in the 18th century or 19th century. Check it out. You will love it, and it's a big set. A lot of information there.
Yep.
What do you think, Ryan?
We're getting close to final thoughts time here. Let me go ahead and while you think, I'm going to go over these super chats real quick.
Okay.
Wendy Carr comes in with drinks all around and Merry Christmas. Matthew H. This has been one of the best reading series I have ever watched, and this Unpacking episode is excellent. Carol is very knowledgeable. Thank you all for making this Christmas and these difficult times one of the best. Amber Christer Doder, I always say it 2 different ways. Sorry, Amber. A suggestion, John, have a look at the food mentioned in William Dampier's A New Voyage Around the World.
Okay, yes.
He introduced things like tortillas, guacamole, and soy sauce to the English public in the early 1700s. Mm-hmm. Taco lover.
Yeah.
And super chat, I am going to need more grog. Real quick before people start checking out, why don't you, Carol, go ahead and tell people where they can find you online, whether it's social media or a website.
Or do you want to be found?
They may be afraid I'll lecture them like I do my students. If you want to get in touch with me, all you have to do is go to our website, which is parsonjohn, ParsonJohn.org, O-R-G. And you can see there the different characters that I do, the different things that I offer, that my husband offers that we do. You won't find anything about A Christmas Carol. That unfortunately stays in my schooling area, but I'd be glad to answer any questions. You can email me directly from there. And if you have any other questions or a comment, I'll be glad to take it from there.
We have several people wishing that you were their teacher when they were in school, and that would still love to be taught by you now.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right, so you guys should probably get into final thoughts kind of territory while you're unpacking this.
All right.
And the super chats that are coming in now, I'm going to try my best to get to them. Thank you for them.
So, truly, this project kind of just sprang out of nowhere. I did the Ichabod Crane story, the Sleepy Hollow story, and the reading of what's his name that falls asleep, Rip Van Winkle. And this kind of popped up. It's like, oh, what are we going to do next? And someone suggested this. And thank you for that suggestion, whoever it was, because I haven't read this. I don't know if I've ever actually read it because, of course, why would you read it? You can see 14 different movies of it. It is a spectacular read, and especially if you take it slow, and it's great to read aloud. It is a great piece of literature, and it obviously the reason why we continue to see it and see versions of it over and over again is because it is just so amazingly powerful, even when it's stripped of all these details that we don't quite understand. Part of that, the fun of it is that this is a different world that we don't live in, right? So we can look back into the 1840s and we can say, wow, it's like us, but it's different, right? So that's part of the stuff I really like about this, but it is an amazing piece of literature. What do you think?
I think it is too. It's probably my favorite book. And I too had not read it before I started teaching it, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to read it. It's just a phenomenal book. I'm the kind of person that I like to read a book, but then I like to find the hows and whys and wherefores. I like to dig it out and see what the purpose is. And this one, like you said, is so full of information and little nuances, and so much is in here that reflects back on Dickens's time period, and it opens the door for us to see what things were going on at that period of time.
So my quick question to you is, do you think this changed society in mid 19th century?
Oh, I know it did. I know it did. They talk about how, what was it, donations, what did they say, quadrupled within 2 weeks? I think that's what they said, quadrupled in 2 weeks after this book coming out. The whole charity drives took a new meaning to it. The whole attitude toward the poor took a different turn, and you see things starting to improve past that period of time. It did. It did exactly what he wanted it to do. They started passing labor laws so that the children didn't have to work in these places, and they didn't have to work at such a young age, nor as long. So yes, it struck a sledgehammer blow against society and the world.
Truly amazing.
It is. It's amazing. And it just goes to show everybody loves a good story.
Yeah, and something he writes in 6 weeks, and they print it with these. It's like, quick, do the illustrations, okay, and let's hand color the prints and do all these. It's really
goodness.
strange. The whole story is really weird. So just so much fun. Carol, thank you so much. Do you have anything to?
Yeah,
okay, I'll turn it back to.
Okay,
Ryan.
great. Soundwave's Ghost is in Super Chat. Great way to cap off a great year of content. One of the top 3 groups of content creators I've watched in 2020. God bless Townsends and their friends. Denise, Maloney, Pierre, and Quinn for Carol. This is one of my favorite live streams ever. Speed and Style, Tony, thank you all for this in-depth discussion of this wonderful book. Merry Christmas and God bless us one and all.
Yes, somebody needed to say that.
Eric Phillips. Figured I would send this tip as we pay to go to a historical park. My dad and I connect over your live stream in North Carolina and Colorado.
Wonderful.
John Talley, thank you for such an amazing show. You guys are amazing. Thank you all very much for your kind comments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess we could wrap it up. We don't have to, but it's getting close to time. So That's up to you guys.
Well, I don't have a whole lot of voice left, so I don't know how Carol's doing. But
Well,
it's like-
we know how the book ends, so
Do
we
we?
know how things go, right? Scrooge turns his leaf. Tiny Tim doesn't die. Scrooge becomes a better man than the good
It's
old
gonna
man
be
in
like
the good world.
Fezziwig.
Yeah,
Although I don't know if Fezziwig.
I like Fezziwig. I just think that would be the greatest
Somebody
name.
just commented and said their cat was named Fezziwig.
Oh, good for you. Good for
Or
you.
their grandma's cat or somebody's cat. Anyway, next week, with the live stream.
What is going
That
on
is going to
next
be
week?
on, did we
Christmas
decide
time.
on Wednesday?
Yeah, because we're getting right up there close to Christmas, we're gonna push that ahead. So next live stream on Wednesday. Who knows what kind of crazy content we're gonna talk about? Probably
And-
something Christmas related.
Real quick, if you are still interested in those mugs that we announced, the Chestnut Stag mug is the only one available.
I knew it.
Thank you all so much for your support in that way. Aaron, can you drop the link one more time? I think that's all the housekeeping. Man, this has been so fun. I want to thank you, Carol. For
You
me,
are
and
welcome.
then I'm
Thank
sorry,
you
I'm
for
stepping out.
asking me. If they hadn't asked, I wouldn't have got to do
You,
this.
you wouldn't have broken down the
I
door.
wouldn't have broken down the door, going, please let me talk.
So thank you, Carol. Thank you,
You are
Ryan,
welcome.
Aaron, and super thank you to all you guys out there. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. Truly, if you just watch the videos and you thumbs up them or comment, that's important. If you share them, that's so important. And then there's the people that help us out financially, whether it's Patreon or Super Chat or buying merch. All those things, they make videos happen. And we've got lots of great plans for next year. We can't wait to get started. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thanks for watching.
And God bless us, everyone.
Lori Shields, thank you for your donation right at the end. Merry Christmas.